Okay guys, in this section we're just doing more practice at verifying identities. So the more we do it, the more comfortable you get with it and the better that you're able to do it. So we're going to spend two sections just on this topic alone. We have our guidelines handy from the last section, so we'll go back and utilize those. Also make sure you've got all your identities from the first section because we'll be using those also again. So kind of like just like what we did last time, we'll be trying to verify an identity. Now, remember what the guideline says. Start with the more complicated side first. So that's what we're going to do. We'll start with 1 over 1 minus sine. I'm going to change that to x because I don't want to have to write that over and over. Plus 1 over 1 plus sine of x. Alright, so dealing with this side of it. Okay, the first thing that we've got to ask ourselves is, okay, as far as trying to simplify this out, if there's any way that I can get both of these fractions together, add them together somehow, that would be good because, you know, what we're trying to arrive at is not two separated fractions. Okay, so the question is, how can we do that? Well, we can see if we can develop a common denominator. And so as we go through this, if I multiplied this fraction by this common denominator, top and bottom there, and then multiplied this fraction by this top and bottom, then that would result in common denominator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this fraction and multiply the top and the bottom by 1 plus sine of x. So when I do that, on the top of the first fraction, then we have 1 plus sine of x over. Alright, now on the bottom side of it, we're going to have what was already there, which is 1 minus the sine of x times what we multiplied by, which is 1 plus the sine of x. Alright, then the other fraction plus, now we're multiplying this times the top and bottom of this fraction, which is going to leave me with 1 minus the sine of x over same denominator, 1 minus the sine of x over 1 plus the sine of x. Okay? Alright, so now we've got it to here. Since the denominators are now common, I can add the numerators together. And we'll get this. It'll be 1 plus the sine of x plus 1 minus the sine of x over the common denominator of 1 minus the sine of x times 1 plus the sine of x. Alright, now on the top we should notice that we have some like terms that cancel out, sine x minus sine x. Then I can add 1 plus 1 and get 2, so that'll leave me with 2. And here, if I use the distributive property to multiply this out, let's see what we get. 1 times 1 is 1. Okay. Now 1 times sine of x, right, is just sine of x, and negative sine of x times 1 is negative sine of x. So sine of x minus sine of x, that's gone. Then the last term is positive times a negative is a negative, and then sine times sine is sine squared. All right. So that's what we're down to now. So in order to finish this off, I can change 1 minus sine squared. If I take a look at that right here, I can change 1 minus sine squared to cosine. So let's do that. So that'd be 2 over cosine squared x. Alright, we're getting closer. Cosine squared now can change to secant, which works out great because that's what we want to turn it into. So 1 over cosine squared will change to secant squared, and then I've got 2 secant squared x, which is what we need to try to arrive at. So we're done. And remember, as you use the guidelines and then start rearranging and simplifying these things down, putting what they're equal to, you'll should be able to come to a point where you're kind of seeing where you're trying to go with it, what the end gain is. In other words, what you're trying to arrive at. And so that's just kind of the idea. But like I had said in the last lesson, there may be times where you go down a road and it just doesn't lead anywhere, and you got to start all over. That may be happening. That's okay. All right. But you just start. You use the guidelines that we had in the last section to help you, and then try to keep changing this and getting it closer and closer to what you are trying to arrive at. And then eventually you'll be able to see how to finish it and get there. Okay? Let's try another one. What about this? We'll start with the left-hand side. So it'll be cosecant squared x minus 1 over cosecant squared x. And we're trying to turn this into cosine squared x. All right, so let's think about what we can do here. Cosine squared minus 1. All right, so, or excuse me, that's not cosine. Cosecant squared minus 1. That is going to be equal to cotangent from this identity. So we'll change that. Cotangent squared x. We'll leave the denominator the same for now. Cosecant squared x. Alright, so let's see what else we can change this to. Now we can deal with this. Cosecant is 1 over cosecant. Remember, anytime you've got these in the denominator, just remember you can change them to something that is in the numerator and get rid of the fraction. That's what we'll do here now for this one, because cosecant, 1 over cosecant is equal to sine. And so we will change this to cotangent squared x times sine squared x. Okay. All right, good there. Let's see what else we can do here. Cotangent squared, because remember we're trying to see if we can't get this in terms of cosine. So I need to get a cosine in here somehow. Let's see, sine is not really equal to anything with a cosine that I could see that would help us, but cotangent would be. So if I take cotangent now and change it to cosine over sine, then we should be in good shape. So let's do that. So cotangent squared would change to cosine squared over sine squared times sine squared x, which works out great since that cancels out and leaves me with what I am trying to arrive at, cosine squared x. And then there you go. All right. So like I say, you just keep going and try to put the puzzle together so that you can rearrange this and change this to what you're trying to get to. All right. One more for us to try here. So let's start with this side of the equation. So we'll go with sine of x over 1 minus cosine of x. And so let's see here. With this, as we kind of take a look at it here, really, you know, when it's in this form with the 1 minus cosine, it looks kind of similar to one of the Pythagorean identities, but remember, in order to make that work, these have got to be squared. Okay, so unless this function here is squared, then this one's not going to help us as far as rearranging is concerned. However, there is kind of a trick that we can use to make it squared, and that's multiplying the top and the bottom by the conjugate of the denominator. So if I write this back, sine of x over 1 minus cosine of x, I can now multiply by the conjugate of the denominator. And of course, the conjugate means to change that sign. So that'll be 1 plus cosine of x over 1 plus cosine of x. So this is multiplying by 1. It doesn't change anything. But it will change that denominator into a form that we can use a Pythagorean identity. So on the top, then, obviously, we're going to have sine of 1 plus cosine x. All right. So I'm not going to, did I leave an x off? Yeah. So I'm not going to multiply that out, distribute that out, because remember, our guidelines say to factor out if all possible. So I'm not going to multiply that through unless I have to make something else simplify. Okay. And on the bottom now, when I multiply that out, 1 times 1 is 1. Minus cosine plus cosine is gone. And then positive times a negative is a negative, and that's going to be cosine squared x. All right, so we've got that now. So let's take a look and see if there's anything else that we can do. Remember what we said, the whole purpose of doing this is so that we can now use this. So if I bring this over, that's 1 minus cosine squared, which is equal to sine, so I'm going to change that to sine. So on the top we've got sine x open 1 plus cosine of x. We'll close it off. And on the bottom we're going to change that to sine squared x. Alright. Okay, so now what? We're getting closer. Let's see. One of the signs can cancel. That'll help. So we'll go 1 plus cosine of x over sine of x. Okay, so now we can start trying to focus on getting what we need in here. And what we need is a cosecant and a cotangent. Okay, so let's take a look at this and see if there's any way that we can get that in there. Okay, so now 1 plus cosecant here, and then the sine. Okay, what would actually help, and remember this is 2 terms finishing up, so if I were to take this denominator and split the fractions, that'll help me some. So that'll be 1 over sine x plus cosine x over sine x. Now typically the guide is put the fractions together, but in this case we have 2 terms, so I need to take this from 1 term to 2 terms, and now I can switch these individually. I can change these individually with identities, which will actually get me to where I want to go, because what's 1 over sine? 1 over sine is cosecant, which is good, so I'll change that. Okay, plus. And what is cosine over sine? Cosine over sine is cotangent, which is the other part that I want. So I'll change that. Cotangent of x. And you got it. That's it. So like I say, the more we do these, the more you practice them, the easier these identities will get. The more familiar you'll become with all the identities. You'll be able to see patterns quickly, more quickly, as far as things that you need to do and which identities you need to use to switch out to make, one thing transform into something else. So, like I say, the best way to learn identities is just to do as many of them as you can. All right, and then that way you get more familiar with how to manipulate these things to turn them in to what you want. All right. Quiz will be the same format. It will be, you just fill in the blanks and you'll have the steps there to choose from. All right?